Sure. So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. I actually had a prepared speech, but I decided on the way over that it's probably not the appropriate audience because I think a lot of you are well informed and very active in this area. So what I would like to talk about first, maybe to give you a little bit of background on the ITU, what the ITU does, how we see the problem, the specific actions that we're taking as an organization, and also some of the areas where we see there could be potential solutions and where we might be able to work together. So for those of you that don't know the ITU, we're actually the oldest organization in the UN system. We date back to 1865. And next year we'll be celebrating our 150th anniversary. And we were started basically because of the telegraph. We were the International Telegraph Union. And we were started because it was impossible to send telegraphic messages from one country to the other. And there was a need to have interoperability and international agreements between countries. And basically the way that we're structured, we're a specialized agency of the UN. We have 193 member states, but we're quite unique in the UN system because we do have private sector members. So we have over 700 private sector members. Some of those members are civil society organizations. Some of those members are academic institutions. So I think we're a quite unique example in the UN system of public-private partnerships. We are structured in three main areas. We have a radio communication sector that assigns the slots for the satellites. They also do the different band assignments for services. We have a standards sector that focuses on interoperability, global standards. And then we also have a development sector where we work with developing countries, helping them to establish sound policy and regulatory frameworks. So the way that we look at this issue, we look at it from two angles. We look at it from the access side, and when I say access, if you look at the figures of the number of people online and the number of people with mobile phones, you will note that there are fewer women that are online. Some estimates show there's 200 million fewer women online, but of course that gap is much bigger when you look in developing countries. And the same is true when it comes to mobile phones. So we focus a lot on the access side because we believe it's important that we get women and girls connected, and then once they're connected, we believe that can lead to better opportunities, that they become empowered, they're educated. And we are also looking, of course, on the career side. Back in 2010, we had the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference, and it's a conference that we hold every 4 years where we decide our strategic financial plan. We also elect our senior management. And at that conference, we adopted a resolution on women, and basically in that resolution we called for an international day. The fourth Thursday of every April would be International Girls and ICT Day. And that day has since become an official UN day. And the importance of that day is quite significant. Over the past 4 years alone, we have 140 countries, Iceland joining for the first time this year, 140 countries that have celebrated Girls and ICT Day. And from the reports that we have received from those organizing those days, we believe we have reached at least some 100,000 girls. So we expect it will continue to grow, and if you're not familiar with the Girls in ICT Day, I think we have a short little video clip that we can look at. But maybe just to back up a minute in terms of numbers, I think it's important. I mean, everyone knows the numbers of women leading Fortune 500 companies. I think that this year was 23 women are heading Fortune 500 companies and 46 are heading Fortune 1,000 companies, and they say that if we don't do anything, it'll take us till 2,241 until we actually have gender equity in terms of who's leading these Fortune 500 and Fortune 1,000 companies. So clearly we need to do something, and as I've seen in some of the materials, the computer science numbers we see continue to go down. Everyone knows that women were involved when the first mainframes were developed, and when universities first started to offer computer science, it was almost 50-50 in terms of men and women taking those courses, and now it's more like 80-20. There was a report that came out yesterday in the Washington Post, big announcement that Google is actually getting into this area. But if you read the article, what they're saying is not much. There's nothing new there. We know that the numbers are going out. I think they reported it was 18% women taking computer science in the US, and they pointed out the problem of role models. And again, it was nothing new, but that was just something that was reported yesterday. And if we look in terms of the ITU government members, today of our 193 member states, I think we have 16 women that are heads of regulators, so 16 out of 193. And there's 160 independent regulatory authorities, only 10 are headed by women. So I think it's important just to give you an idea of the sort of audience that we traditionally have in the ITU, and at any given meeting, if we're lucky, maybe in terms of the number of delegates, we would have maybe 20% women delegates. And one of my colleagues was making a little timeline for me, and she noted that the first time a woman ever participated in one of our meetings was in 1932 from the Soviet Union at the time. But it was not until 1965 that we actually had a woman head a delegation to one of our meetings. And it was not until 1999 that we ever had a woman chair our board meeting, which is called the ITU Council. And we have 5 elected officials in the ITU, and so far we've never had a woman. So again, just some numbers to put things in perspective. So in terms of what we're doing, we realize that it's a problem. We don't want to sit back and just wait for the matter to correct itself. We believe that we need to take actions, and our member states also believe that we need to take actions. So internally, when you look at the ITU workforce, we have, let's say, even more women than men at the professional level at the lower levels. So in the ITU, we have the general staff, which is the administrative staff, and then we have the professional staff. And we have a system like the UN where the lowest is a P1, professional 1, and the highest is a P5, professional level 5, and then we have our director level, and then our elected officials. And so when you look at the P1 and P2, you actually have more women than men. But then when you get to the P3, it jumps, and women, it's sort of like 25% women and 75% men, and then it gets worse above. And so we are well aware of this, and our member states have been pushing us to take action. And I think we were also helped by the UN system. As you may know, the UN Secretary General has placed gender very high at the top of his agenda. The UN Women was created under the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and he also called for the creation of something that's called the UN System-Wide Action Plan on Gender Mainstreaming. And it's a great thing for us at the ITU. It's also a great thing for the UN system, because it forces every agency of the UN system to be accountable So it forces us to report and to track and to be accountable for a number of different milestones and variables. And because of that, well, because of a number of things, but I think that was a nice way to give us a little push. When the system-wide action plan was adopted, it was actually adopted in the ITU building at a meeting that we happened to be hosting of the UN Chief Executive Board. So it was all the heads of the UN agencies. They meet twice a year, and they were meeting 2 years ago in the ITU building, and that was at the meeting where we adopted this system-wide action plan. And so following that adoption, our council members, our board, got together and said, okay, now it's time for the ITU to have a policy. So we developed a policy which was approved last year, and we now have an action plan, and we're finally starting to see a number of things coming into place. So we're calling for at least 2 women on every one of our internal committees. We actually had committees that were all men. A lot of these committees are composed based on the levels. So of course, if you only have men at the top level and you're requiring a certain grade level, then you're only going to get men in those committees. And so our board has allowed us to make exceptions. Should there be no women at that level, that we can make an exception in order to have better representation of both men and women on those committees. So that was a good step. We're also doing more to improve our recruitment practices. And as of this year, Switzerland actually has asked us in our annual reports to our board to report on the number of applicants, men and women, the number of applicants that are pre-selected, which means they meet the basic qualifications, the number of men and women that are shortlisted, so they come into the top 5 or 10, and then the number of men and women that are actually hired. And so, and by level, because we have the tendency to group and say, okay, for professionals, we're this number, and of course, if you group levels 1 to 5, the percentages are quite different. So that's been a big step, and we have a task force in the ITU. I'm the chair of the task force, and we have representation of all departments and all bureaus. So we're making progress slowly but surely, but I believe that was an important step inside the organization. Externally, as I mentioned, we have this Girls in ICT Day. We have a toolkit that we make available to both our sector members, basically to anybody, but our membership and anyone that would be interested. We have a toolkit to help people organize a Girls in ICT event if they wish to. And the purpose is really to get girls in primary school and in high school excited about why they would like to choose a career in ICTs. We had our, I would say, first big event at the UN 3 years ago. We had Nellie Cruz with us, and we had a number of high-level speakers, including Secretary Clinton at the time, had a special ambassador on women, Milan Revere, and she was also with us. And it made quite an impact. And the year afterwards, it was Nellie Cruz that invited us to Brussels, and we had Sheryl Sandberg that participated remotely. And I think it was quite a good event, and as well as this year where we did it back at the ITU. We also have a portal, so we have an online presence where we invite anybody that's done an event to share their event, their experience. And we also have a site where we invite women to put up their profiles, to have sort of a mentoring going on if they're volunteering to mentor girls. You can go on our site to find that. And we also have a wealth of training opportunities, tech camps, that you can post if you have some that you wish to have publicized. We would be happy to include that on our portal. We also do a lot of work on digital literacy, and I think you're going to be talking this afternoon about what you're doing on digital literacy. So we're working with an NGO called telecenter.org, and so far, working together with them, we have trained 1 million women in digital literacy, and we're planning to train another 1 million women and girls, and we're really happy with how that program has been running. We also have quite a unique group. We have a commission that's called the Broadband Commission for Digital Development. It's an interesting commission that was put together a couple of years ago when the UN Secretary General called upon the UN agencies to step up their actions for meeting the Millennium Development Goals. So this commission was put together to advocate at the highest levels of governments the importance of technology in development, overall development. And within this group, which is comprised of 7 heads of UN agencies, President Kagame from Rwanda, which is quite a unique example of Rwanda when it comes to gender. They have more women in their cabinet than men, more women parliamentarians than men. He is the co-chair together with Carlos Slim from Mexico, and we have a number of very active CEOs of some major tech companies. And within this commission, we've set up a special working group on gender. And that working group is co-chaired by Helen Clark, who's the administrator of the UN Development Program, and also Madame Punzili, who's the executive director of UN Women. And what we're looking at there is, again, specifically looking at technology and women's empowerment. And we've set a target to have equality and access for broadband by 2020. So it's quite a bold and ambitious target, but it's been set, and we're trying to encourage governments to take this seriously. And I would say, I think that our message is being heard. For any of you that have been following what's happening in the UN in terms of the development of the post-2015 agenda, next year we finish with the Millennium Development Goals, and we set a new development agenda for the world, and it's very contentious. There's some 200 or 300 goals on the table, and everybody's fighting whether health or education is more important than the other. But this time, gender is at the top of the agenda, which is great, and I'm pretty sure we'll be there with a goal on gender. And what's interesting is what's on the table now is that there be equality in access to ICTs as one of the main targets. Whether it stays in, right now we're on the 0 draft, and we have another 18 months of negotiation, but it's there. And I think that's an important recognition, and I think that's the result of a lot of hard work on the advocacy level. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention, and you were mentioning before some of the work that you were doing on incentivizing industry, something that we've been doing with UN Women. We just signed a memorandum of understanding with UN Women. UN Women has been working with Global Compact. Global Compact is this group in the UN that really works with companies. It's sort of like the UN part on partnerships and working closely with the private sector. So they have something that's called the WEPs, the WEPs. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they have 7 principles. It's called Women's Empowerment Principles. And so we've been working with them on trying to get tech companies to sign on to these WEPs. And we're working on a roadmap to roll out these WEPs for the tech industry. And what these WEPs are trying to get companies to sort of sign on to get women in leadership positions, to provide better employment practices. It's a number of, I would say almost basic, but very helpful principles, and we're trying to get the tech companies excited to sign on to that. Because what we see more and more, we do have a problem to get girls in tech, but there's that big problem of retention. So after you get women into the sector and then they're dropping out, and we believe that that these 7 WEPs can actually help in terms of the retention and also the solution part. And basically the last part that I'd like to mention is basically on the solutions, where we see that we need to be doing more work and where we could maybe do some things together. You mentioned before the issue of role models, and clearly that's a huge issue. A few years ago, we have an anniversary day every May 17th, and it's the anniversary of the ITU and the International Telegraph. Telegraph Convention was signed and we were created. And 3 years ago, we had as our theme girls in ICT, and we awarded a number of laureates, but we also designated Gina Davis as our sort of patron special envoy for this issue. Gina Davis, who's the American actress, probably most well known for her role in Thelma and Louise, but she also played on a series that didn't last too long, although I happen to love it, when she was the President of the United States. And she's very passionate about girls' issues and passionate about the way that the media portrays them. And she has an institute which is called the Gina Davis Institute, and we work very closely with her in advocating to the media the importance of appropriate role models for women and girls. And of course, in her research, she highlights the role models that girls, especially young girls, have today, from Snow White and Cinderella, and she goes through sort of all of the favorite Disney movies and how all of the strong characters are men. And she challenges the media industry to do more. And in one of her most recent speeches, she talked about the effect that shows like CSI and NCIS have had, and the number of girls, because of course on those shows you have many women criminologists, criminal investigators, and the number of women taking up forensic science and these kinds of things has skyrocketed. And they believe that this is because of these very popular shows, and she's been calling for, why doesn't the industry get together and actually do a show in the technology sector? And of course, the latest rage, I understand, I haven't watched an episode, I've only seen the trailer, is this Silicon Valley show where, again, it's all men, geeky teenagers, and they're all becoming very successful, and there are no women on that show. So we believe a lot more can be done, and we believe that we're only going to make an impact if everybody gets together and really starts going together towards the media companies and saying, it's really time, there's a need, and something has to be done here. We also believe that there is more to be done on the parent side and educating parents about how important it is to get their girls interested and excited. And we see many cases parents discourage girls from getting involved in this field, and we think that's really an audience that we need to target. And of course, obviously, we need to be targeting the teachers as well. When Nellie Cruz joined us for this year's ICT and Girls event, she asked the girls in the room, how many of you know how to code? And she called on all of them, and they were from the age of sort of 10 to 16. Go out there, take a coding class, and if you become a coder, you can write to me, and you can be my coding ambassador. And so she tried to get the girls all excited about coding, and we did actually have some workshops on coding that day, and my own daughter was involved, and she was very excited, and I think it was life-changing for her. We'll see what she becomes, but she really took great interest as a result of that day. And of course, the other area where I think we need to do more, it's in mentoring. I remember being at an event last year. There's a group that's been put together by the women ambassadors in Geneva, and it's called The Power of the Empowered. And they had a session last week, and it was Navi Pillay, the Human Rights Commissioner, who spoke and talked about her struggle and her journey, and she reminded everyone, it's a struggle to get up the ladder, but for women in particular, when you get up the ladder, don't take it away. Make sure you leave it in place so that when the next one comes, the ladder's still there and they can climb up, and they don't necessarily have to struggle or have the same challenges that we may have had. So I think it's incumbent on each and every one of us to try to give back in whatever way we can, and help a young girl or a young professional to be encouraged and stay motivated. So maybe I will stop there, and if you have any questions, or we can come back to it. Thank you.